I'm here with John Zogby, founder of the Zogby poll and author most recently of the book for The First Globals. It is a pleasure to welcome Mr. Zogby to Lafayette College, and we are excited to get his insight on his research of the millennial generation examined in his new book. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, my pleasure.
So first, let's start off with, who are First Globals?
Well, for starters, they're those Americans born between 1979 and 1994. So far, we may even get into 1995, 1996, but there's about 72 million millennials of that age, and I call them First Globals for really a variety of reasons, which we're going to talk about.
Why did you choose to focus on this particular age group and study them?
They were so dramatically different. It's something that I noticed about 12, 13 years ago in a series of polls I did about American attitudes towards the rest of the world and America's role in the rest of the world, and multiculturalism and our alliances and war and peace. And what I discovered was that those 30 years of age and older all were in some fundamental agreement on pretty much every issue that we tested, give or take a few points. But then way over on another side were these First Globals, these young people who had a much more planetary sensibility, a much more worldly outlook than the rest of the country.
So you just kind of mentioned the polling that led you to find this information, but did you attribute a specific poll that you conducted through the Zogby poll that led you to find all this information, or was it further research that brought you?
It started with a series of polls that I did for the Foreign Policy Association out of New York. It was 3 polls, a total of 3,000 Americans that we talked to of all ages, and about 150 questions. And the patterns were so noticeable that then the rest of the decade, I made a point to ask the kinds of questions that would draw out who these people were. And so it's actually really tens of thousands of Americans that we've spoken to.
So when you drew out the answers of who these people are, what did you find? What characteristics define First Globals? More
than any other age cohort, they had passports and had traveled abroad. That included, older people. Secondly, more than a third, 35%, said, I expect to live and work in a foreign capital at some point in my life. Almost 2 out of 3 said that being fluent in a foreign language is either very or somewhat important to my career and my success. 1 out of 3 said it's very important to be fluent in a foreign language. No other age group was even close. And then their attitude towards other cultures was much more tolerant, much more accepting than even people who were just slightly older than they were.
So would you define this generation as different or special in the way they kind of approach the globalization?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I call them First Globals, because of mobile technology, because of social networks, because of exposure to the rest of the world, either through travel or through technology, the internet. They're most likely to have someone from another culture in their social networks. They're very different. Now, what's all that mean? It means that they're less likely to be inclined towards war, more likely to want to resolve difficult issues, because they're less inclined to see other people as the other, to objectify the other, and in that sense, they're very, very different again.
So you mentioned that your polling brought you to do more research on this, but what drove you to write this book, First Globals?
I had written a first book back in 2008, and it was The Way We'll Be, and it was a look into the future, the transformation of the American dream. And one chapter was about First Globals, and I've done hundreds of speeches all over the country, and that was one topic that really connected. I would see parents, I would see students, I would see employers, I would see a lot of people nodding when I talked about this group, and talk about them basically in a very positive light, because 20-somethings have had an awful lot of negative stuff that's been written about them, and I wanted it to be an antidote. And so what I thought I would do is just zero in Write a fairly small book and have half of it as descriptive and the other half prescriptive. So now that we know about First Globals, how do we empower them and unleash their potential?
In your book, you mentioned that First Globals have a different workplace outlook. You talk about how they allow social and work life to collide. Could you provide some detail on that topic?
Well, sure. You know, a lot of the bad rap on First Globals is that they're not 9 to 5. What I've discovered is that they're not. They're 7-24. Always on. Why? Because their world is always on somewhere. And so they are connected. And so to expect them to be working at 9 and until 5 really negates the essence of who they are. In addition to that, it's very important for them to be committed to an issue that's larger than themselves. This is a group that 85% say they want to change the world, and 71% say, I would like to work for an entity, whether it's a corporation or a non-governmental organization, that affords me the time to volunteer and to give towards a better world.
You touched on being connected a little bit, that's really important to this generation. It's a 24/7 thing. Can you talk about social networking and how that plays probably into the connectivity of this generation?
First of all, they are facile with it. I remember a time when a social network was going next door and borrowing a cup of sugar. It's a whole lot different now, and it's global. I think what's very important to understand here is that my generation and those slightly younger and slightly older, we're steeped in what I call verticalism. If we identify an issue or a problem, we move it up the chain, up the chain of command, and try to find a resolution by going vertical. First Globals are horizontal. See a problem, number one, there's a sense of immediacy. If there's a problem, it needs to be resolved immediately. But secondly, I go horizontal, but I crowdsource. If money is needed, I crowdfund. I send it out, and there's a dual benefit. One benefit is that by going horizontal, I can find a solution. The other is that by going out and coming back in, that solution can build a consensus along the way. In many ways, that's why I think it's so important that we help young people get started, because we really need this kind of problem solving. So many of the institutions that we have today that depend on verticalism are really crumbling before us.
I really like what you just said about the horizontal problem solving. Would you be able to describe that really briefly and really simply for everyone to understand?
The rest of us are steeped in verticalism. You know, move a problem up the chain and try to find a solution that way. It may take forever. What I like about First Globals is that they're horizontal in the sense that they throw the problem out to their social network. It may go viral, but what they're looking for is an immediate solution, which they'll get. And then along the way, as the solution comes back, there's a chance to build consensus on it.
So we talked about how social networking has driven this generation. What other forces have caused First Globals to be different from prior generations?
Well, I think number one is the broader culture. You are the first age group that played more soccer than Little League Baseball and Pop Warner football. Now, what's important about that is that soccer is a global sport. And so you're the first generation of Americans really to care about the World Cup, hence the rest of the world. You were exposed to global brands. We grew up in a world where Made in America and the Union label was everything, but you're exposed to United Colors of Benetton, you're exposed to Louis Vuitton and Prada, to global brands, and they mean something to you. To us, rock and roll was music, jazz was music. Today, you're exposed to global music, whether it's integrated from the rest of the world into jazz and to rock, or more importantly, hip hop, which really can't rightfully be called an American form of music anymore.
What is the general perception of this generation? Is it grounded, or is there a misconception due to generational differences?
Well, if you're asking about how other people see it, I think there's a misunderstanding, and that's what we're trying to clear up here by showing just how different this group is really from everyone else. I think First Globals themselves appreciate hearing the positive, are very tired of the negative. But there's a troubling aspect here, and it's a term that I've coined called CENGA, C-E-N-G-A, college educated not going anywhere. And what is particularly troubling about that is that this is a long recession, but it's especially troubling when 6-7 years is your entire adult life up to this point. So I'm concerned about a growing cynicism. In fact, even for the first time, concerned about a generation gap of resentment on the part of First Globals towards older employees.
You talked about the criticisms a little bit, that we receive a lot of criticisms of First Globals. Could you maybe touch on a few stereotypical criticisms of First Globals?
Yeah, they're lazy. They all got trophies, so they're spoiled. They all live at home. Some of those may very well be true, but I think at the same time there are a lot of positive values that have been imparted, and particularly that notion of being committed to the broader world. That's unique for 20-somethings, you know. The essence of being a 20-something is to care about myself and how I look and what I wear and my relationships. 20-somethings typically don't have a community sensibility. This group does.
What companies are currently benefiting from employing First Globals, and is there a specific industry that is more fitting for this group of individuals?
Well, I'll tell you, there are a number of companies. IBM clearly comes to mind. In fact, in many ways, IBM has defined the term First Global, the globally integrated corporation. By the same token, you've got a number of companies like Motorola, like Viacom, those that are worldwide and understand that they can benefit by young people who are actually mobile, who want to move around and who want to be globally aware and can really, on a moment's notice, move and relocate.
And what about an industry? Do you think there's a certain industry that's more attractive for First Globals to move into that?
Not necessarily. I mean, we're heading, certainly into a new economy, with nanotechnology and biotechnology and so on. But no, I don't think any particular industry. I think the whole world's a playing field, and it really doesn't matter.
Why do you think independence is so important for First Globals?
Independence in terms of
First Globals feeling independent.
Well, I think there's a gap between having so much knowledge and wanting to be unleashed, and yet kind of feeling like I'm stuck on Go or Mediterranean Avenue, to use the Monopoly metaphor, that I haven't had a chance to really get started, and it's very frustrating. Maybe frustrating for parents to have 20-somethings who are home, but imagine how difficult it is for those 20-somethings. It's not an enjoyable experience for them, especially since they have so much to offer.
Do you think this is an American phenomena, or are there First Globals, as you define them, all around the world?
They're all over the world. They're all over the world. For starters, this book zeroes in for now on Americans, but the same kind of numbers that we see here, we see certainly in Europe. But there are First Globals. 21% of young Jordanians and Tunisians say, I'm a citizen of the planet Earth. And it's really astounding. You saw some of that unleashed, in the Arab Spring, but also elsewhere. There's a revolutionary period, and so much of that revolution is being empowered by great numbers of young people who have moved into the middle class and who have become educated.
And do you think social networking and the connectivity plays as much of a role in the global and the rest of the world as it does in America?
Oh, absolutely huge. The revolution in day-to-day life in rural Africa, in rural India, let alone in Sao Paulo and Beijing, it's an enormously exciting period. And to be interconnected means to be empowered. Much the same way if you've read any history and go back to the history of feudalism, once the serfs left the land and went and fought in the Crusades, wow, how are you going to get them back, to work in the fields and not care what time it was or care about their own future? Now that the empowerment that's in the palm of their hand is enormous.
And do you have any advice for first globals? Should we assimilate to act like older generations, or should we continue with our behavior and hope that everyone else conforms?
Well, you have to assimilate. There's still the rest of the world out there, and there's still a lot to learn. But my advice to first globals, when you're preparing your resume, don't put "I got a 3.8" on it. In fact, I've always suggested that that printers should just print 3.8 and you could just stamp it on. Everybody's got a 3.8. Tell me what you did. So you worked as a cashier. Did you save your company money? So you worked as a playground director or a coach. Did you resolve a conflict? Did you make a decision that helped move your employer forward or your family forward? Tell me what you did and why it matters to me.
Do you have any advice outside the workplace for first globals?
Yeah, absolutely. Better to have your tough times in your 20s than in your 40s. But it is very, very rough out there. Continue to hone your skills. Understand that there is a next economy right around the corner. We just have to live through the next 4 or 5 years. It's going to be very difficult. But there's money to be invested. Be entrepreneurial. That doesn't mean necessarily going out and starting a business. It does mean being nimble, being able to seize opportunities when you find them.
That's all the questions I had planned. Did I miss anything that you'd like to?
This is the post 9/11 and the Great Recession generation. These values are formed, and they'll be taken along with them into their 30s as they develop families and relationships and employment and careers and so on, and they'll take it into their 40s. We boomers, I call us Woodstockers, we developed our values in our teens and 20s the same way, and to a great degree, even though we act as parents and act as fogies, there's still an element of those 20-somethings that's still inside of us.